Well, Anthony Albanese sure knows how to tackle Australia's productivity problem. Have a big meeting so a bunch of people can sit around a table discussing it. That was the Prime Minister's big announcement this week about how he's going to get the economy going. It'll be a big meeting that'll happen in August between government, unions, community groups and business leaders. It's good that they're inviting the business leaders since they kind of run all the productivity. The thing is that economists already know what boosts productivity. We don't need a big, fat, expensive powwow. What boosts productivity is government getting out of the way. Government making itself smaller and letting hard-working, smart Aussies get on with the job of starting and running their own businesses the way they want to. At the moment, the biggest thing holding back business and productivity in Australia and employment and jobs is crazy red tape, green tape, black tape, woke rainbow tape. Excessive rules and regulations, excessive meddling, excessive ill-thought-out policy, and too much centralised control coming from control-freak bureaucrats who've never run a business or created a job for somebody else a single day in their lives. Not to mention the massive tax we pay. It's not rocket science, but it requires the government and politicians to do something that they will never do. Cut their own jobs, their own departments, and leave the rest of us alone. We're one of the most over-regulated, over-governed, over-taxed nations on the planet, and it isn't working. And it's time that we tried something radically new. We need a government committed to one thing, reducing the size of itself to the smallest possible dimension and interfering as little as possible in everything, and doing it all on as few tax dollars as possible. Mr. Albanese said on Tuesday that not every challenge can be solved by government stepping back. But how about we at least give it a shot for a while, Albo? We've never tried government stepping back before. It could be a novel idea. You might be surprised what 27 million people can actually achieve and produce when they aren't hamstrung every single step of the way by some Karen from a government department sticking their nose into things. So there will be unions, community groups and government people at this meeting. But get this, leading economists pushing for the kinds of hands-off, laissez-faire kind of economic policy that I'm talking about, they won't be invited. Jim Chalmers will be convening the productivity powwow. That's like asking Greta Thunberg to lead a Jewish coal mining company. The PM says the meeting will shape his government's growth and productivity agenda. I've got trouble with the words productivity and government, big in the same sentence, frankly. And he says that his government will facilitate private sector activity and private sector investment, because that's what government does best. I mean, it's just waffle and word salad, seriously. The best way that a government can facilitate private sector investment and activity is to stop facilitating things. Get out of the way. The Australian newspaper reports that it has spoken to business figures who are warning against the process replicating last term's Jobs and Skills Summit, which largely rubber-stamped policies already endorsed by unions. In other words, it was a complete waste of time, pure theatrics, a waste of money, and a total setup. I get the feeling that what's going to come out of this new Talkfest will be a plan involving unions, those community groups, and overpaid fat cat government bureaucrats telling business and the private sector what to do. It won't make a scrap of difference to anything, and productivity will continue to decline. And that's bad, because the fact is that until we solve this big productivity problem we've got, wage rises aren't going to be possible. And so inflation will continue to hurt everyday Aussies. The only way to stop the rot is to take a chainsaw to the size of government in this country and let smart people who bust a gut every day running small businesses and big businesses get on with the job free of constant distractions and restrictions imposed by our bloated governments. These are the people who are actually accountable to the customers they serve every single day and the investors who fund them every single day. That's what private business is about. If they stuff up, they feel it and they suffer immediately. How about we let them run the show for a while? If you want a good example of politicians acting like a pack of clowns, look no further than Tasmania. In the last election, in March last year, the Liberals won 14 seats in the 35-seat Tasmanian Assembly, so they had to form a minority government. Labor won 10 seats, the Greens 5 seats, and there are 6 independents. So having the most seats, the Liberals formed that minority government, and Jeremy Rockcliffe, the Liberal leader, became the only Liberal Party leader of any state or federal government in the country at that time. This was before the LNP won power in Queensland and the whole country was red back then. Anyway, last week the Parliament of Tasmania passed a no-confidence motion in Premier Rockcliffe, so he had to step aside. The Liberals decided last weekend not to replace him with someone else from within their ranks, which means that there has to be an election. Anyway, Rockcliffe popped down to Government House on Tuesday night to see the Governor and request an early election. But Governor Barbara Baker opted not to immediately give a nod to the request, saying that she'd consider her options. She has the constitutional power to do that. She could have possibly asked the Labor opposition leader, Dean Winter, to see if he could form a government by testing his support in the Assembly. But Mr Winter ruled out governing with a minority and having to be in government with the Greens. Could kind of understand that. It seems like Labor really want an election to happen, or they want someone other than Rockcliffe as Premier because they think they'll have a better chance of winning the next election. Meanwhile, the Liberals didn't want to force Rockcliffe out as the leader, and Rockcliffe said he wouldn't resign, despite business leaders and some members of his own party actually trying to urge him to do so. Everything got sorted out late Wednesday night, with Governor Baker announcing that she would grant the request for an early election, satisfied that there was no possibility that anyone could form a government in the current mess. So Tasmanians are off to the polls again, the second time in just 16 months, on July 19. So the United States is officially reviewing the Aukus agreement with Australia and the UK. AUKUS is a lot more important for Australia than it is for the US. Americans don't care about us, and most of them wouldn't know who Anthony Albanese was if you showed them a picture of him and pointed to a kangaroo. So it's our job as the little guy to make sure that the 800-pound gorilla that we rely upon for our security actually knows who we are, likes us, and actually cares about us and would pay attention if we were attacked. Now, America would pay attention if they needed us for something, and thankfully they do. They need us for strategic partnership reasons in the Pacific. And we've been good allies for many decades, and we've been very loyal, and we share language and culture. We have a lot going for us. But we must never take the alliance with the United States for granted or get too big for our boots. Someone needs to tell Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong to tone down the hubris a bit. Last week, we reported on how the US Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, I said it right this week, made it clear in his speech at a big security conference in Singapore that he wants allies in this region to step up their game on military spending. Hegseth told our Defence Minister Richard Marles that he wanted Australia to lift its defence budget from 2% of GDP to 3.5% of GDP. That's a lot. But later that week, Anthony Albanese seemed to be scolding the US for making such a suggestion.
What we'll do is we'll determine our defence policy, and we've invested just across the forwards an additional $10 billion in defence. What we'll do is continue to provide for investing in our capability, but also investing in our relationships in the region.
Investing in our relationships in the region. That sounds like a signal for investing in our relationship with China. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, so long as we continue to be friendly but cautious with China, and we understand that China is semi-hostile to Australia. It is a communist dictatorship, and America is friendly to Australia, a formal treaty ally, and is a liberal democracy with British heritage like us. America is far from perfect, but to carry on like there's a moral equivalence from Australia's perspective between the US and China, that's an extremely dangerous starting point. So I hope Mr. Albanese was referring to relationships across the wider region, relationships with countries more like us, like Japan, the Philippines, Taiwan, Singapore, strategic partners who are also wisely a little bit wary of China. Anyway, it was his tone and manner there that really bugged me. I'm a proud Aussie too, and I don't like it when America or anyone puts the screws on us to step up our game a bit. But some respect for the US government, President Trump and Secretary Hegseth, can be shown in your tone and manner of delivery. So all eyes are going to be on Albanese's performance with Trump at the G7 Leaders Summit, which kicks off in Canada Sunday. Australia is not in the G7, but we are one of 8 guest nations that have been invited along. There's no formal confirmed meeting between the two men, and there's talk now that it may not even happen. It was widely expected that they would be having talks on the sidelines of the G7. Well, Albanese better turn on some of that charm he bungs on like he does a few weeks before every federal election real fast. After the snub to Hegseth, we've since had Penny Wong infuriating the United States by joining the UK, Canada, New Zealand and Norway in slapping financial sanctions and travel bans on 2 very senior Israeli government ministers. Apparently, this is because these men have backed Jewish settlements in the occupied West Bank against the spirit of a two-state solution. But Penny Wong made it clear that what's happening in Gaza also has a lot to do with that decision. She said Australia and the other countries were sending a message that Israel has ignored the international community and we do not tolerate it. The situation in the West Bank and in Gaza are untenable both for civilians and long-term peace in the form of a two-state solution, Penny Wong said. Former Aussie Foreign Affairs Minister Alexander Downer wondered out loud this week if Australia was going to start sanctioning all sorts of politicians from other democratic nations for doing things it doesn't like, asking, why just Israeli politicians? This is an unprecedented move. And the United States aren't happy, Jan. Because the really big news broke Thursday. The US is formally reviewing AUKUS to ensure it aligns with Donald Trump's America First agenda. Now, this is probably, hopefully, just some typical signaling from Trump, from the United States in classic Trump style. But we better get our act together in how we start to deal with America. We might begin by getting a new ambassador to Washington. Leaving Kevin Rudd there after his comments about Trump is not smart. The man leading the review for the Pentagon on AUKUS is a guy called Elbridge Colby. Now, Elbridge Colby is known to be very, very sceptical of AUKUS, and he's previously criticised Australia for not spending enough on defence to counter China. He's said in the past publicly that the main concern the US has with Australia is our defence spending, and the fact that Australia is well below the 3% of GDP level advocated for NATO, yet Australia faces far more powerful security challenges in China than the Europeans do with the threats around them. It's a fair argument, and one that will resonate with Donald Trump, no doubt. So don't expect this review to not come with a bill for increased defence spending attached. What Prime Minister Albanese should do, if and when he meets Donald Trump this coming week, is get on the front foot. We're going to have to lift the spending anyway. We can't bludge off the US taxpayers for our security any more than we already do. So why not take the first move? Why not indicate a willingness to lift spending, show some partnership spirit, and become a bit more of a good ally, or at least signal that we're a good ally? I know we're a proud country, and I know we box above our weight. We really do, and America recognises that. But we need AUKUS, and we need the United States. And we're becoming a bit too big for our tiny little boots, I fear. The vibe from the government is already not smart. Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister Richard Marles is downplaying this review, saying, it's just a normal part of the process. It's natural that the Trump administration would want to examine this major undertaking, including progress and delivery, just as the UK government recently concluded an AUKUS review and reaffirmed its support. AUKUS will grow both US and Australian defence industries, as well as generating thousands of new manufacturing jobs, he said. Okay, we're not buying that, Richard, I'm afraid. It's just not going to wash that position, mate. This is serious and you need to take it serious, and you know it. The co-chair of the AUKUS working group in the United States Congress is a Democrat named Joe Courtney. And on social media, he's already said that a collapse of AUKUS would spark rejoice in Beijing. Australia does have some value to America and some leverage. But if we had a really smart government, we could have a lot more. America is very dependent upon rare earth minerals. China has a lot of them and is holding back exports to America. But Australia also has a rich reserve. It wouldn't be just good business. It'd be great for defence and trade if we built a big rare earth mineral industry. Rare earth minerals are essential for electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, even military tech. Australia is the world's fourth largest producer of them. But here's the catch. China controls over 80% of global processing of rare earths. And that's the tricky part of the business. It's not just about digging them up out of the ground. Processing rare earths is expensive, it's chemically complex, and it creates some environmental challenges. But they can be managed. But of course, we are miles behind China in our ability to process rare earth minerals. Why? Well, you guessed it. Not because people don't want to invest or don't want to learn or we don't have the smarts in Australia, but government regulations and long approval times have slowed down that development. Add to the fact that many of the deposits are in remote parts of Western Australia and the Northern Territory, and suddenly logistics becomes another big hurdle to be overcome. Now, to be fair, Australian companies like Lynas Rare Earths are scaling up, and government support is flowing into new projects and processing plants. But the money and international power that could flow from Australia being a rare earth minerals giant means we should be hearing much more about that than we do about renewables. But we don't, do we? Riots seem to be erupting all over the Western world lately, the US, Northern Ireland, Paris, and it's all tied to one issue: excessive too many, too fast immigration. There's nothing wrong with immigration, but if it's done on the scale that most Western nations with left-leaning governments have been doing it lately, it's not healthy. It's downright destructive, culturally, socially, and economically. Now, let's be clear. What's happening in Los Angeles are not protests, they're riots. And when protests become violent riots, it is totally appropriate and indeed necessary and a requirement for law and order to be restored by the government on behalf of the vast majority of citizens sitting at home peacefully who want political disagreements sorted out peacefully in elected democratic chambers of parliaments, not violently by thugs and mobs running amok on the streets. The failure of Gavin Newsom to take firm action is making him look like the incompetent, complete fool that he actually is. The shooting of the Aussie reporter, by the way, covering the riots by a lunatic cop with a rubber bullet was absolutely obscene. But I couldn't help notice the hypocrisy in the way our elected leaders showed their outrage. Where was the outrage in Melbourne when dictator Dan Andrews' out-of-control police force was firing rubber bullets on unarmed protesters, unarmed, and they were just protesting, at the shrine of remembrance, no less? Nobody stood up for independent video journalists like Rukshan Fernando, Topher Field, and Avi Yemeni back then. As Avi pointed out on his Rebel News show this week.
We don't find it acceptable that it occurred, and we think the role of the media is particularly important.
How is it okay for your police force to be firing at unarmed Australian journalists?
Spare me your selective outrage, Prime Minister Karl Stefanovic, the Greens, and every other hypocrite suddenly condemning an Australian journalist being hit by a rubber bullet while reporting on the front lines of the violent LA riot. Because where were you when journalists right here at home were being targeted, arrested, shot and pepper sprayed at point blank range while covering peaceful protests for basic human rights?
Exactly. No matter what you think of either protest, the utter hypocrisy here is astounding.
How is it okay for your police force to be firing at unarmed Australian journalists?
Exactly, Carl. And where was that energy when it was happening on our streets?
He just comes at me and points it in my face.
So they just started spraying everyone. There was so much media there, and I reckon so many people from the media just got sprayed. We were just covering what was happening, and they just started spraying everyone.
That's independent journalist and cameraman Rukshan Fernando speaking there, the real Rukshan. You can find him online, of course. And he and Avi discussed the double standards on their opposition podcast this week. And Rukshan made the point that it's not just about the journalists.
Members of the Australian public, innocent people who are just walking down the streets of Melbourne, not burning cars, not looting shops, not doing any such destructive or violent activity, just protesting in a peaceful manner, was set on by Victoria Police almost at point blank range. Just like that, they fired these weapons into these people hurting many of these people and maiming many of these people at the Shrine of Remembrance. 10 minutes before the police started firing at people like this, I was talking to people with families in strollers and their kids and all this kind of stuff. And then the Victoria Police, with these exact same weapons that they're so worried about that hit this journalist, Victoria Police indiscriminately, not even targeted like that particular police officer, perhaps, let's say that. What is worth is indiscriminately started firing in to a crowd of Australians gathered peacefully at the Shrine of Remembrance, causing no trouble or harm to any of the police or throwing anything at them. So we have this double standard in this country where we have now a prime minister, the media class, calling for investigations about what happened in the United States of America because they are so anti-Trump, but they do not even care about what the police do to their own citizens in this country with the exact same weapons, hurting them to achieve their own political outcomes. These are the highest order of hypocrites.
The real Rukshan laying down some solid truth bombs there on the Opposition podcast with Avi Yemeni of Rebel News. If you like The Other Side, one of the best ways you can support us is by signing up for the products of our sponsors. And one of our best sponsors is PIA VPN, the virtual private network that stops people spying on your internet activity. It'll keep you and your family truly safe from the prying eyes of big governments and corporations without slowing down your internet speeds. And you can watch Netflix or other streaming services using your regular accounts with them as if you're viewing from any country in the world. You can sign up for less than $3 a month and get a whopping 83% off the normal price. Just go to piavpn.com/otherside to sign up and you'll get the discount. And you'll get more info on those special deals if you check it out. That's piavpn.com/otherside. That was a segment clip from our weekly Friday night news show, The Other Side, which you can watch in full by simply going to YouTube and searching up The Other Side Australia. Then you'll find our full shows playlist. You can also find all of our full shows and our segments on our own website, othersidetv.com.au. That's othersidetv.com.au. Help us build a whole new Aussie media by joining us over there and signing up for the exclusive side.